Under the neon glow of Guangzhou World Cup Stadium, the world held its breath. Spain, elegant, composed and brimming with talent, stood face to face with the unlikeliest of challenges. South Korea, the CO hosts, whose relentless energy had already stunned Italy just days earlier. It was June 22, 2002. 90,000 fans turned the night air electric, a crimson sea of flags, drums and chants pulsing like a heartbeat. For Spain, this was meant to be a coronation. A generation that had promised so much, Raúl, Xavi, Morientes, Joaquin, was on the verge of breaking the national curse. For Korea, this was a dream already beyond imagination, the first Asian side ever to reach a World Cup quarter-final. And now, perhaps, something even more. The opening whistle sliced through the roar and instantly, Spain took control. Their passing was smooth, methodical, a prelude to what would later become tiki-taka, the football of art and rhythm. But that night, the brushstrokes met resistance. Korea pressed with an intensity that bordered on madness. Every pass, every touch, every breath was contested. Guus Hiddink, the Dutch architect behind this miracle, had crafted something extraordinary. A team that didn't just run, it hunted. The Koreans swarmed in packs, covering every blade of grass as if powered by some invisible current of national will. Spain's artistry began to falter, their triangles disrupted, their rhythm broken by lungs and legs that never seemed to tire. Then came the moment that changed everything. In the second half, Fernando Morientes rose like a ghost at the far post and buried a perfect header. The Spanish bench exploded, but the referee's whistle froze them in place. The linesman's flag was raised, goal disallowed. Confusion spread across the pitch. Even the replays couldn't explain it. Minutes later, another cross, another finish, Joaquin's ball curling perfectly. Morientes again at the end of it. And once more, the net rippled. But once more, the flag. Another goal ruled out. The Spanish players' faces drained of color. Something was slipping beyond their control. By extra time, their movements slowed. The technical brilliance that had defined them dissolved into frustration. Each misplaced pass was met with a red-shirted blur snapping at their heels. Korea's fans screamed as though carrying their players forward, wave after wave of energy. As the clock ticked toward penalties, Spain looked broken, not by the scoreline, but by exhaustion, by disbelief, by the dawning realization that this was no ordinary opponent. This was a team running on something beyond physicality, on faith, on pride, on the fever dream of a nation that refused to wake up. And when the penalty shootout began, it was no longer a football match. It was a psychological war. Spain's Xavi went first, calm, perfect. Korea answered. Raúl watched from the bench, injured and helpless. Then came Joaquin, the young winger who had run himself to collapse. His shot was slow, tentative, saved. The stadium erupted. Moments later, Ahn Jung-hwan, Korea's golden hero, stepped up. He'd already sunk Italy with a golden goal. Now he had a nation behind him again. One breath, one strike, one history rewritten. The ball hit the net. 5-3. South Korea were through to the semi-finals of the World Cup. Spain stood still. Some stared at the grass. Others gestured at the officials, demanding explanations that would never come. Iker Casillas, the young keeper, simply looked upward, as if asking how something so inevitable could dissolve into chaos. That night in Guangzhou wasn't just a loss, it was a fracture. The moment when Spain's golden promise cracked and something in Korean football was reborn. Because under those floodlights, in the roar and the rage, a truth emerged. Sometimes beauty alone isn't enough. Sometimes the game belongs to those who refuse to stop running. Before the chaos of Guangzhou, before the whistles and the disallowed goals, two worlds had been quietly forming their destinies on opposite sides of the planet. In Spain, football was an art form, a blend of culture and identity, shaped by decades of flair, frustration, and unfulfilled promise. The nation had always produced brilliance, from Luis Suarez in the 1960s to the gifted generation of the 1990s. But every tournament ended the same way: heartbreak. There was always something missing, a killer instinct, a unity of purpose. Spain could play the most beautiful football on earth, but when the pressure came, they crumbled. By 2002, that cycle had become part of the national psyche. Players like Raúl González and Fernando Morientes carried the weight of that history. Raúl, the symbol of Real Madrid's dominance, was elegance and intensity fused into one. He wasn't just Spain's captain, he was its conscience. Morientes, his club partner, was the dependable foil, all timing and quiet power. Behind them, a new generation was emerging. Xavi Hernandez from Barcelona, a metronome. In motion, still learning to dictate games but already hinting at the revolution to come. And in goal, a teenager, Iker Casillas, fearless, impulsive, and seemingly born for nights like these. Together, they represented Spain's blend of youth and tradition, artistry and ambition. Meanwhile, 6,000 miles away, in the bustling heart of Seoul, a very different kind of dream was taking shape. When South Korea won the right to co-host the 2002 World Cup with Japan, few believed they could truly compete. The nation had qualified for the tournament 4 times before, and never won a single match. They were spirited, disciplined, but outclassed at the world level. Enter Guus Hiddink. The Dutchman arrived in late 2000 to a skeptical press and a team unsure of its identity. Hiddink's first games were disastrous. Heavy defeats, defensive chaos, fans calling for his resignation. But he saw something few others did. A country with boundless energy and pride, just lacking structure. He tore the playbook apart. Gone were the cautious defensive formations. In their place came a high-pressing, fitness-obsessed system that demanded total sacrifice. Training camps became brutal marathons, double sessions, endless running, psychological drills. Players were pushed beyond breaking point. Some quit, others adapted. And the ones who stayed, men like Hong Young-bo, Lee Woon-jae, and Ahn Jung-hwan, were transformed. Ahn, in particular, embodied Korea's reinvention. Charismatic, fearless, and technically gifted, he became the emotional spark of the team. His confidence bordered on defiance, and in a nation built on discipline and humility, that was revolutionary. Hiddink didn't just train footballers, he rewired their mentality. We may not be the most talented, he told them, but we can be the most relentless. Every friendly match, every mistake, became a lesson in endurance. By the time the World Cup arrived, Korea were the fittest team in the tournament, physically and mentally. When the group stage began, the world noticed. They outpaced Poland. They outwitted Portugal. They held the United States with unflinching resolve. Suddenly, this wasn't just a CO host. It was a phenomenon. Spain watched with interest, but little concern. They had their own momentum. 3 wins from 3 in the group, a solid victory. Over Ireland in the round of 16, even if it took penalties to get there. The press spoke of destiny, of maturity, of Spain finally learning to win ugly. But under the surface, cracks remained. Raúl's groin injury was worsening. Joaquin, only 20 years old, was overused. And Xavi, though brilliant in flashes, was still finding his place. Against Ireland, Spain had lost their rhythm and composure under pressure. It was a warning, one they didn't heed. For South Korea, the momentum was opposite. Their belief was growing at a fever pitch. The nation had become a sea of red shirts, the Red Devils rallying. Behind Hiddink's men, as if they were defending the country itself. The victory over Italy in the round of 16, sealed by Ahn Jung-hwan's golden goal, didn't just shock the world. It united a people. And yet, beneath the euphoria, Hiddink remained calculating. He knew Spain would be different. Faster, more precise, more patient. To beat them, Korea would need more than endurance. They'd need to drag Spain into chaos, to make the game emotional, physical, suffocating. That's what the next few days were about. Recovery, drills, analysis. Hiddink watched tapes of Spain's passing patterns, studying the angles and timing. Of Xavi's turns, the width of Joaquin's runs, the aerial threat of Morientes. He knew that if Korea could disrupt their rhythm, if they could make the Spanish lose their calm, the game would turn. Back in Madrid, the Spanish press were confident, even dismissive. Spain will not make the same mistake Italy did, one headline read. This is a team built on control. But in Seoul, one line was spreading through the Korean camp like gospel: we will run until they stop believing. Two philosophies were about to collide, one built on beauty, the other on endurance. And in the heat of Guangzhou, only one would survive. By the time Spain's chartered flight touched down in Guangzhou, the tone around their camp had shifted. The heat was heavier, the noise louder, and the confidence that once carried them through the tournament now trembled with quiet unease. The Spanish squad arrived to a sea of Korean fans, not jeering, but chanting endlessly, their voices filling the humid air with something almost supernatural. For Spain, this was supposed to be a controlled exercise, a match against a brave but limited host. But within hours of stepping off the bus, the players felt the difference. Billboards, flags, chants, television broadcasts, every part of the nation was united in a single purpose. It wasn't hostility, it was belief. And belief, as they were about to learn, is the most dangerous weapon in football. Inside the Spanish camp, there was an air of quiet professionalism. Coach José Antonio Camacho was an emotional figure, fiery, patriotic, always ready to sweat and shout his team into rhythm. But his players were anxious. Raúl's injury had flared up after the Ireland match. The captain had scored twice in the group stage, but now he could barely sprint. The decision to rest him for the quarter-final weighed heavily. Without Raúl, Spain's attack lost its focal point, its leader. Camacho turned to Morientes and a young striker named Baraja to fill the void. Joaquin, dazzling and unpredictable, was trusted to provide the spark from the right wing. Xavi and Valerón would orchestrate the middle, their passing the lifeblood of Spain's identity. But behind closed doors, Camacho warned them, "They will not stop running. You must not lose your heads." Meanwhile, across the city, Gus Hiddink had transformed the Korean training ground into a hive of controlled chaos. Sessions were short, intense, tactical. He focused on pressing triggers, when to swarm, when to drop, how to exploit Spain's high line. He drilled his players on the psychological battle, reminding them that Spain would grow frustrated if they couldn't find rhythm early. "Make them angry," he said. "Make them think we are everywhere." Captain Hong Myung-bo led by example. At 33, his legs were slowing, but his mind was sharp. He'd seen European football up close, played against the best, and understood how to turn that knowledge into leadership. He told his teammates, "Don't fear their names, fear nothing." The night before the match, Spanish journalists reported on the oppressive humidity, the jet lag, the fatigue from a long tournament. It sounded like excuses, but fatigue was real. Spain had played a grueling 120 minutes and a penalty shootout just 5 days earlier. Korea, riding the wave of national euphoria, looked tireless. When game day arrived, the stadium pulsed with an energy no visitor could ignore. 90,000 fans in red, chanting, drumming, synchronizing their hearts with every kick. For Korean players, it was oxygen. For Spain, it was suffocation. The opening minutes confirmed what Hiddink had planned. Korea pressed in waves, not reckless, but timed with precision. Every time Xavi received the ball, 2 red shirts closed in. When Joaquin broke down the flank, he was met by 3 defenders. Korea didn't care about possession. They cared about pressure. Spain tried to stay composed. Morientes dropped deep to link play. Valerón floated between lines, trying to unlock space. For brief spells, Spain found their rhythm, those familiar triangles of passes, crisp and confident. Yet every time they advanced near the box, Korea's endurance reasserted itself. Tackles flew in, bodies collided. The Spanish bench grew animated. players shouting at the referee, gesturing for fouls that never came. Camacho could feel it. His players were losing focus. Every moment of frustration fed the crowd. Every protest fueled the noise. By halftime, Spain had dominated possession, over 65%, but they hadn't truly hurt Korea. The CO hosts were feeding on momentum, their pressing undimmed, their belief swelling. Hiddink, standing calmly on the touchline, clapped once and smiled. The plan was working. Then, in the second half, the tension began to twist into something else. Spain's fatigue deepened. Their passes slowed, and Korea, sensing weakness, started to break forward with purpose. Ahn Jung-hwan danced past defenders, his hair flying, the crowd roaring with every touch. Seol Ki-hyun fired wide. Park Ji-sung tested Casillas with a driven shot. Spain responded. Joaquin, brilliant and desperate, darted down the wing and cut a perfect cross to Morientes. Header, goal, relief. But then, the flag, disallowed. Camacho exploded on the sideline, veins visible in his neck, shouting in disbelief. Replays showed nothing clear. The Spanish players surrounded the referee, pleading, demanding. But the decision stood. The match continued. Moments later, another goal, another flag. Again, Morientes. Again denied. The confusion turned to fury. Xavi slammed his fist into the turf. Joaquin screamed into the humid night air. Casillas from his box shouted for calm, but no one could hear him over the chaos. By the 80th minute, Spain's legs were gone. They'd run 10 kilometers more than they were used to. Korea kept pushing, chasing every second ball, every clearance. Hiddink rotated his players with ruthless timing, fresh legs against weary minds. The crowd began to sense it. The miracle wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. As the whistle blew for full time, Spain looked stunned. 90 minutes, gone. Still 0-0. Their domination meant nothing now. The match was slipping into extra time, a realm of endurance where technique fades and willpower reigns. In that moment, the two teams stood on opposite emotional poles. Spain, frustrated, exhausted, unsure. Korea, breathless, yes, but smiling, fueled by something invisible and immense. The storm had gathered. The next 30 minutes would decide which side would survive it. Extra time in Guangzhou began not with football, but with noise. A deafening, rhythmic wall of sound that rolled through the stadium like thunder. 90 minutes had drained both sides, but the atmosphere itself seemed to refill South Korea's lungs. For Spain, it was the opposite. Every cheer, every drumbeat seemed to tighten their muscles further, to remind them that this was not neutral ground. Guus Hiddink stood on the touchline, arms folded, expression unreadable. He had planned for this. Every sprint in training, every ice bath, every sleepless night of conditioning had led to this exact moment. 90 minutes gone, Spain exhausted, Korea still running. He leaned toward his assistant and said only one thing: now we press harder. The first few minutes of extra time were chaos. Spain, desperate to reassert control, tried to push the ball wide, but Korea's press was feral. Hong Myung-bo, the captain, marshaled the line like a general, directing his defenders through sheer will. Every interception was greeted with a roar from the crowd. Every Spanish pass backward felt like retreat. Then came the flashpoint, the moment still replayed in documentaries, still debated in whispers. Joaquin, exhausted but defiant, twisted down the right flank, beating his man and curling in a perfect cross. Morientes soared again, perfectly timed, perfectly placed. His header struck the back of the net. Spain erupted. Relief, vindication, salvation. But the flag went up. A silence, brief, stunned, then a wave of disbelief. The referee disallowed the goal. No foul, no clear offside, just confusion. On the touchline, Camacho stormed out of his technical area, face red with fury. Players surrounded the officials. Even neutral commentators struggled to explain it. The second disallowed goal of the night. In that instant, Spain's fragile composure shattered. The match descended into psychological warfare. Korea sensed it. The hesitation, the anger, the disbelief. They fed off it. Their pressing became wilder, their challenges harder. Each tackle seemed designed not just to win the ball, but to drain Spain's spirit. Xavi, usually calm and calculated, began misplacing passes. Valérand stopped showing for the ball. Even Casillas, usually impassive, barked angrily at his defense. Korea's players, An Jong-hwan, Park Ji-sung, Seol Ki-hyun, kept running, smiling even as their legs trembled. The referee's whistle punctuated the night with an erratic rhythm, fouls, protests, delays. Every decision added fuel to Spain's rage. By the second half of extra time, the match no longer resembled football. It was survival. Players cramping, lungs gasping, time stretching endlessly. Camacho waved his arms, urging his men forward. Hiddink urged his to stay calm, to wait for the inevitable moment when Spain's fatigue would tip into collapse. And yet, amidst the exhaustion, there were flashes of beauty. Joaquin, weaving through three defenders on sheer instinct. Casillas, diving to save a long-range strike from Park Ji-sung. Morientes, chasing hopeless crosses, driven by pride alone. With every passing minute, Spain's golden generation was being tested not in skill, but in will, and Korea improbably refused to break. Then, a chance. In the 117th minute, Korea won a free kick near the box. Hong Myung-bo stood over it. The veteran defender's shot curled low, forcing Casillas into a desperate save. The rebound fell loose, chaos in the box, but Spain cleared. Barely. The whistle finally came, cutting through the storm. 120 minutes. No goals. The match, somehow, was heading for penalties. The players collapsed to the turf, some in prayer, some in disbelief. The Korean fans never stopped singing. For them, it wasn't exhaustion, it was destiny. Hiddink gathered his players in a tight circle. His voice was calm, measured. "You've already won," he told them. "They are finished. Look at them. They don't believe anymore." On the other side, Camacho knelt in front of his men, shouting over the noise, trying to summon belief from somewhere deep within. "Remember Ireland," he cried. "We've done this before." But his words bounced off tired faces. Spain's penalty lineup was clear: Hierro, Baraja, Xavi, Joaquin, and Morientes. Reliable men. Experienced, but they carried the weight of frustration, of injustice. And that weight is heavy in a shootout. Korea's shooters were ready, calm, smiling, unburdened. An Jong-hwan, Hong Myung-bo, Lee Eul-yong. Players who knew that no matter what happened, they had already made history. As the two teams walked toward the penalty spot, the contrast was stark. Spain's shoulders were heavy, Korea's eyes were clear. Casillas bounced on his line, trying to block out the noise. Lee Woon-jae, Korea's goalkeeper, stood still, barely moving, calm as stone. The whistle blew. Hierro stepped up first and scored. Relief. For a moment, Spain breathed again. Then Hong Myung-bo, the captain, perfect strike, 1-1. Baraja next, low, firm, but Lee guessed right. Saved. The stadium exploded. The crowd's roar was not a cheer, it was an earthquake. From that moment, the shootout belonged to Korea. Xavi scored. So did Park Ji-sung. Joaquin, nerves frayed, hesitated. His penalty was weak, almost reluctant. Saved again. The Spanish bench fell silent. And then came An Jong-hwan, the same player who had knocked out Italy with a golden goal. He walked up slowly, smiled slightly, and placed the ball down. A deep breath. One strike. The ball hit the net, and Guangzhou erupted into pure euphoria. Korea had done it. They had beaten Spain. 5-3 on penalties. The Red Sea poured from the stands. Players wept, embraced, collapsed. Hiddink lifted his arms once, then disappeared into the swarm of bodies. Spain stood still. Some stared at the referee. Others fell to the grass in disbelief. Casillas, face pale, turned away, unable to watch the celebration. Joaquin covered his eyes. Camacho, the fighter, simply bowed his head. It was over, and in that silence, beneath the roar of victory, the echoes of injustice, fatigue, and heartbreak began to shape a legend that would outlive the night itself. When An Junghuan's penalty struck the net, it wasn't just the end of a match. It was the moment the football world tilted on its axis. For South Korea, it was transcendence. The stadium in Guangzhou became a living organism, a single, unified heartbeat echoing across a nation. Fireworks burst above the night sky. Fans poured into the streets of Seoul and Busan, waving flags, crying, singing, dancing until dawn. They had beaten Italy. They had beaten Spain. And now, they stood on the brink of something that had never been done before. For Spain, it was devastation, but not the ordinary kind that follows defeat. This loss was laced with confusion, disbelief, and a bitter sense of injustice. It wasn't that they had been outplayed. It was that they couldn't quite understand how it had happened. In the dressing room, silence hung heavy. Camacho slumped against the wall, drenched in sweat, eyes hollow. Joaquin sat motionless, replaying his missed penalty over and over. Morientes, who had seen 2 goals ruled out, kept shaking his head, muttering, "Impossible." Outside, the reporters swarmed. Questions filled the air. What happened? Were the referees right? Had FIFA interfered to favor the CO hosts? The conspiracy theories began before the players had even showered. In the post-match press conference, Camacho's voice trembled. "We scored clean goals," he said, "twice. And both were taken from us." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The pain was obvious. Meanwhile, Guus Hiddink arrived smiling but measured. He didn't gloat. "We fought for every ball," he said. "We respected Spain. But my players never stopped believing." His calm demeanor hid the chaos beneath. He knew how close it had been, how fragile the line between miracle and disaster truly was. But for millions watching around the world, the images told their own story. A European powerhouse undone by a team of underdogs who refused to stop running. That was the moment football's hierarchy cracked. In the weeks that followed, Spanish newspapers erupted with fury. Front pages spoke of robbery, scandal, shame. Commentators replayed the disallowed goals in slow motion, frame by frame. The first, Morientes' header from Joaquin's cross, was clearly onside. The second, even more baffling, appeared to have no infringement at all. FIFA issued statements, vague and diplomatic. The referees defended their decisions. The truth was lost in the noise. But amid the outrage, another realization began to emerge. A painful, undeniable truth for Spanish football. For all their skill and technique, they had not adapted. They had been drawn into Korea's chaos, and they had lost control. In the heat of Guangzhou, endurance had beaten artistry. Willpower had beaten structure. Belief had beaten beauty. And yet, for all its heartbreak, that loss would plant a seed, one, that would grow into something extraordinary in the years to come. Because that night exposed Spain's flaw, their obsession with perfection. Their game was beautiful but fragile. Every mistake felt like a betrayal of identity. Every setback caused panic. The defeat in 2002 forced the next generation, Xavi, Iniesta, Torres, Casillas, to confront that weakness. They would remember Guangzhou, the exhaustion, the disallowed goals, the shootout heartbreak. They would remember how it felt to lose control. And from that pain, they would build something new. But in 2002, that transformation was still years away. For now, it was Korea's night, and their triumph was one for the ages. As the Korean players gathered on the pitch, tears streaming down their faces, the cameras zoomed in on An Junghuan. Just days earlier, he had been sacked by his Italian club Perugia for scoring the golden goal that knocked Italy out. Now, he stood at the center of another seismic moment. The man who had humbled two European giants in a single tournament. Nearby, Captain Hong Myung-bo lifted his arms to the sky, eyes closed. He wasn't smiling. He was absorbing it. The noise, the light, the weight of history pressing down on him. He knew what it meant. For generations, Asian teams had been dismissed as spirited, but naive. Fast, disciplined, but lacking the steel of Europe or South America. That myth died in Guangzhou, and for Guus Hiddink, the Dutch tactician who had arrived as an outsider, this was vindication. He had turned raw energy into strategy, discipline into endurance, faith into fuel. When asked how he felt, he simply said, "I am Korean tonight." But the euphoria outside the stadium told a deeper story. Across the streets of Seoul, millions of fans gathered around giant screens. Red shirts stretched as far as the eye could see. Old men wept openly. Young children chanted the players' names. Families who had never watched football before found themselves singing national anthems at midnight. This wasn't just sport. It was unity. It was identity. It was a nation rediscovering its confidence after decades of struggle. For Spain, the journey home was heavy. No words could soften what had happened. Some players refused to speak. Others cried openly on the plane. Casillas, only 21, sat by the window in silence. Joaquin, haunted by his missed penalty, said later, "That night stayed with me for years. I saw that moment in my sleep. And yet, from that wreckage, a strange kind of strength began to grow. The players didn't know it yet, but the loss in Guangzhou had changed them. It had stripped away illusions and forced them to confront the truth of what winning really meant. The beauty of their football was undeniable, but beauty alone doesn't survive wars. That lesson, learned the hardest way imaginable, would one day make them champions. In the years that followed, the echoes of Guangzhou never truly faded. For South Korea, June 22, 2002, became a national myth, a story retold in classrooms, in pubs, in documentaries, in the collective memory of a people who had once been told they couldn't dream this big. For Spain, it became a wound that, over time, hardened into something else, resolve. That single match, 90 minutes of chaos, 30% of agony, and a handful of penalties, reshaped the destinies of two footballing cultures. For South Korea, the miracle of 2002 was more than just a sporting achievement. It was a national awakening. The image of Ahn Jung-hwan's final penalty, of the Red Sea in the stands, became a symbol of unity in a country still healing from economic uncertainty and generational divides. Suddenly, football was no longer just a pastime. It was a mirror of what Korea could be, disciplined, relentless, and unbreakable. Guus Hiddink, the Dutchman who had sculpted this miracle, became an adopted national hero. Streets were named after him. Statues were built. The South Korean government even granted him honorary citizenship, the first foreigner ever to receive that honor. To this day, his name is spoken with a reverence usually reserved for poets and presidents. He had shown Korea that belief was not a luxury of talent, but a weapon of will. Yet even in triumph, the shadows lingered. Controversy followed Korea's run, accusations of biased refereeing, of decisions that favored the CO hosts, of invisible hands shaping outcomes. Italy and Spain both filed formal protests to FIFA. The debates would never be settled, and perhaps they were never meant to be. Because in sport, memory bends toward meaning. For the rest of the world, Korea's run became both miracle and mystery, a story that lived somewhere between inspiration and suspicion. But for the Korean people, none of that mattered. What they remembered was the roar, the unity, the feeling that for 1 month, the world had turned its eyes eastward, and they had stood tall. And then there was Spain. Their exit from Guangzhou was a national trauma, the latest in a long line of heartbreaks stretching back decades. But buried inside that pain was something essential. That match forced Spain to look inward, to see that their beauty, their technique, their artistry, had always been missing a layer of resilience. The old Spain was brilliant, but brittle. Guangzhou exposed that fragility under the brightest lights imaginable. In the years that followed, a quiet evolution began. The young men who had suffered that night, Xavi Hernandez, Iker Casillas, Carles Puyol, carried the lesson forward. When Luis Aragonés later took charge of the national team, he built around their pain. He told them, "We must not only play, we must endure." By the time Spain lifted the European Championship in 2008, then the World Cup, in 2010, and another Euro in 2012, it was clear that something fundamental had changed. Their football was still beautiful, maybe more than ever, but it was now built on a core of patience, grit, and emotional control. Casillas became the calm leader who no longer looked upward in despair, but forward in command. Xavi and Iniesta turned possession into suffocation. What once crumbled under pressure now thrived on it. That golden era, that dynasty, was born in the pain of Guangzhou, and in Korea that same night marked the high point of a golden summer that still defines their footballing soul. Though they would never again reach such dizzying heights, the spirit of 2002 became a blueprint, fast, fearless, collective. Every future generation of Korean players would be told to run until they stopped believing. The two nations, so different in history and culture, were forever linked by that one night, one shattered, one reborn. Looking back, even neutral fans can see it now. That match wasn't simply about who won or lost. It was about endurance, of the body, of the mind, of the spirit. For Korea, it was proof that the impossible was possible. For Spain, it was the beginning of a journey toward immortality. And perhaps that's what makes the Guangzhou quarter-final more than just a World Cup story. It's a parable about beauty and belief, exhaustion and rebirth, chaos and control. When An Jung-hwan's penalty rolled into the net and Spain's players sank to the grass, the world witnessed two births, the birth of an Asian power and the rebirth of a European giant. One night, two nations, and a game that proved that even when beauty breaks, it can still become legend.